everybody. I hope you're having a great week so far. I just wanted to check in with you this week and talk to you about those who are grieving, because that tends to be an issue at the holidays, and a lot of us don't know how to respond when we have friends and family and church members that are going through a rough time during the holidays because they've lost someone this year, 2 years ago, or even as long ago as 3 years ago. People are still grieving longer and longer, 5 years. It really isn't a matter of just at this point you're done grieving. So it could be a longer time ago that this person lost something and they're still struggling over missing that person during this time of year. It's very, very hard. And grief can come in forms of loss, but they can also be grieving due to a lost job, a lost marriage, a lost lifestyle. So there are lots of things that people grieve and we don't acknowledge during the holidays that they're grieving. We expect everyone to be happy and joyful and everything to be fine, and it isn't always fine, and we should acknowledge that. So how do we respond to that? That's very hard, even among Christians, to know how to love well, how to be a good neighbor to those who are grieving. So first of all, to understand what grief looks like, it's good to know what the stages of grief are. The first is the loss. And during the time of loss, often people experience this time of shock where they don't believe this is really happening. This feels like it isn't real, like you're in some kind of a Dali painting. It's just a very bizarre, strange feeling. It doesn't feel like can be, you're kind of in a state where it rolls on into protest. People begin to be angry, they bargain with the past and do things like, if only I had done this, if only this had happened, if only that person had not done such and such. And this is the time when people start to blame others and show a lot of anger and resentment and hard feelings, but that's part of grief. It's a normal part of grief for people to demonstrate different kinds of anger and try to pretend that this could have been avoided, it could have been prevented. If only this could not have happened. And then another stage of grief is disorganization. That's the sorrow time, the time when people are very sad, very melancholy. Sometimes the sorrow even sinks to a point of empathy. People have trouble concentrating. They have trouble paying attention to what's going on around them. They can forget things. They lose a clarity of thought and mind. They just feel like everything's a mess. Everything's in chaos and nothing seems normal. And they don't even know how to continue to move on with their lives. And then there can also be a stage of reorganization where people start to begin to make this new normal. How does life look without this person, without this marriage, without this job, with this new lifestyle? Whatever it is they've lost, how do they redefine their lives as a new normal afterward? Now, one thing you need to know about the stages of grief is they don't all happen in a straight line. People will bounce back and forth through these stages, and they aren't in a perfect line or even in a perfect circle. So they're not in succession, and people can take longer periods of time going through these stages of grief. So know that and give grace for that and allow for that. Also allow lots of time. Not everybody takes the same amount of time to grieve. Everyone grieves differently. And you see sometimes family conflict among neighbors and friends that all are grieving the same loss of a person, but they're irritated with each other because they don't see the other people grieving the same way that they are. So understanding that everyone grieves differently is an important thing in maintaining your relationships during that time of grief when your emotions are raw and tender and sore. And it's easy to be very angry with each other during those protest moments of anger. So know that everyone's going to go through it, the stages at different times, at different seasons, back and forth, all in different ways. Children can oftentimes show more anger than sorrow sometimes and grief. So know that and be prepared for that and show your compassion for them even when they're being angry, when it doesn't seem like a way that you would grieve. Also, it's important to know that the long-term goal of recovery, people say you're going to get past it or get over it. People don't get over the loss of someone. They move on to a new normal, but they don't forget. They don't do it by forgetting. And when we try to encourage people to forget, to move on, to put that behind you, that doesn't honor how important that person was to them. And instead of doing that, we can encourage them to remember. Remember how beautiful this person's impact was in your life. It's good to remember. To remember is always going to be bittersweet. The very beginning of grief, it is more bitter than bittersweet. It is just hurtful. It's painful. There's no way to go around it. As Psalm 23 says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, not around it, not over it, not circumventing it on some kind of subway. You have to go through it, and it's hard, and it hurts, and it's painful. There's only one way, though. So understanding that the goal is not to forget, but to move through these stages of grief and still be able to remember that person and honor them as an important and valuable piece of their lives. So what do you say to someone who grieves, and what do you not say? I mean, you don't say platitudes. Those things are terrible to say to people who grieve. They minimize the grief. Things like, you'll get over it, or God needed another angel. First of all, that's not even theologically appropriate, because angels are different creatures from human beings. People don't become angels. We become children of God. If we're saved, we go to heaven, and we sit with God in heaven forever as his children, but we don't become angels. So if God needed an angel, he could certainly create an angel. He doesn't take people because he needs an angel, and that sort of upsets people who are grieving. It doesn't comfort them. So don't say something like that. If you can say something at all, say that you care. And the best things that you can say are sometimes silence. Silence and your presence can be the most compelling messages of compassion during grief. Just to be there and to do the hard work of being quiet and listening. It's hard. You want to fill that awkward moment of sadness and sorrow with words, but often the words that we try to fill that space with make it worse instead of better. And what that person needs most that's grieving and sorrowful is just to have you be there with them. To be willing to get there in the mess and the muck of sadness and be with them in it. And that shows that you care, and that you're not trying to cover it with a bunch of words that mean nothing, and try to reassure them, you'll feel better someday. Well, in the moment that they just lost someone, they don't want to think about feeling better. They just feel that pain of that emptiness in their heart. They don't want to think that they're going to forget them and that it's all going to be fine. They want to know that it's okay to feel empty and to feel sorrow. Just to tell them that you care and that you realize this has got to be the hardest thing that they've ever gone through. So acknowledge their pain and be there with them in it. And there will be times when they're just going to need space. Give them space. But don't exclude people who are grieving. Sometimes people in grief and sorrow are treated like pariahs. No one wants to be around them because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. Well, don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing. If you tell someone you love them and you're thinking about them and you're praying for them, that's not the wrong thing to say. That's always a good thing to say. And making sure that you don't exclude them and you're not afraid of them. They're not going to give you cooties because they're in grief. Don't treat them like they don't belong, because that makes the grief harder, because then they're isolated in their grief. So give them space when they ask for it, but always invite them. Invite them to come with you. Encourage them to join you. Don't pressure them, because they don't need pressure. They don't need guilt or shaming added to their grief, but do welcome them. Be warm and inviting and welcoming to people who are in grief. Don't pretend nothing happened. Acknowledge when you meet them on the street, I realize that you're going through a hard time right now. I just want you to know that I'm praying for you. And I'd love to have you come with us on our next trip to the museum on the day that we're going to go paint at paint night. So invite them to come and join you to do things, to get out of just sitting in the house and thinking about nothing else all day. Suggest specific things that you can do to help. If they've just recently lost someone, offer to do something special. Can I bring you some meals? Don't say, I'll do anything. What do you want me to do? Often people who are in grief are so discombobulated. As I said, that's part of the grief process. They're foggy-minded. They don't know what to ask for. They need a lot of things, but they don't know what they need because they can't even get their head straight right now. So what you want to do is think of some specific things to ask for. Can I cut your grass? Can I write, address all of your mail for you, your thank you cards, your Christmas cards that you don't even want to write this year? Can I address those for you and just write them up, and all you got to do is sign them, and we'll put them in the mail together? Do you want me to bring you some groceries? Do you want me to run some errands for you this week? Let me know. Give them a list of things that you could do for them, that if you were grieving, things that you normally do that would be hard for you to do if you were feeling just weighed down like an extra million pounds on your chest from grief and having a hard time breathing, having a hard time getting up in the morning. Those kinds of things. What would you want someone to do for you? So suggest giving a gift in honor of the person that they lost. Sometimes people will establish a memorial in honor of the person that was lost, and you can always give to that and send them a card and let them know that you gave to that because you were thinking of them. Offer to create an ornament to honor that person so they can have that and say that this person who was your son, your husband, your father meant so much to me. And an ornament with that written on it that was personalized might be a special gift for them to treasure because it honors that person's space in their life. Can I donate to that person's favorite charity, whether they were a lover of museums or writing or a lover of children or animals or whatever it was that person was passionate about? I'm going to give to this charity that represents something that your loved one loved in their honor, and give you a card to show that their life is still touching others today, so that they were here, and in their honor Christmas gifts were given to the people that they would have cared about. That really helps someone in grief, is if they can recognize that their person that they're grieving is not forgotten, but is still having an impact through the way that they touched lives, and people recognize their heart while they were here. Make sure you check in with those who are grieving and sad on a regular basis. If they're neighbors or friends of yours or church members, people in your small groups at church, in your business associates, check in with them once a week if they were somebody that were close enough to you that you could feel comfortable doing that. If not, every other week, check in with them so that they don't feel forgotten or left out. And pray for them every day. No matter how well you know them, you can include them on your prayer list, write them on a little piece of paper and stick it beside your Bible so it'll be somewhere where you see it every day. But pray for them every single day. They're going to need that prayer support during the holidays. And if you know someone who is really struggling with grief and you realize that there's a real danger in how deeply they're struggling, invite to help them get to a professional for help. There are counselors out there who specialize in grief that can help them get through this, that can help them set up ways to honor the loved one, that can even help them, if it was a complex grief issue, deal with the trauma. And by complex grief, there are things that complicate the issue of grief. For example, if that person died in your home, that's a complication to grief that makes it even harder to survive. If you came across the person after they had died and you were the one to discover the body. If you were involved in a robbery and you watched them get shot. There are lots of things that complicate grief that make it even more difficult because there's a trauma event involved with the grief. So things like that can make it harder, and recognize that that would be a time that a professional should be invited into that space. So help them if they need help in that area. Help them find somebody that they can afford, somebody that they're going to be comfortable with, offer to go with them, to drive them there, and encourage them in a kind and comfortive and supporting way. So I'm glad that you joined me today, and I hope that you are looking forward this holiday season to sharing the gift of Christ by being a good neighbor to those who grieve. If you recall, Christ was born in the midst of a horrific experience of grief. All the babies were murdered by Herod at the time of Christ's birth. So he was actually born during a time of mourning, not during a time of great rejoicing for most people in that area. So Jesus came, and he also, when he began his ministry, one of his first things that he said are, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." So Christ was born into and continues to have compassion for the brokenhearted, and we can honor his birth this Christmas season by offering hope that light in the darkness, that star in the bleakest sky that was ever in history when all these babies were massacred. So make sure that you can really make your heart a manger for Christ and welcome him into your homes this season by sharing love and compassion and empathy for those who grieve. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.